Hi, welcome back to Storytime. So today is our finale of the Poirot Investigates series, and it's going to be the last Agatha Christie that we read this year. I do still have one more that I can read, but I'll do that, after the new year. Next up is Charles Dickens' The Haunted House, and yes, that is a Christmas book. I'm really interested to see how it turns out. Oh, hey, Mr. Brightside. Good to see you. How's your morning going? I love your name is showing bright green for me, and I love that color. Yeah, just starting for me too. So you get to wake up with the smooth sounds of Sunny reading a story. Well, I hope you have a great day. I hope you don't work too hard over there. I just got finished actually making some creme pâtissière, which we got some donuts last night and they had chocolate on them, but they didn't have cream filling, and I love cream filling in my donuts. So I'm like, I'm going to whip up some creme pâte before my stream today. And it took me a half an hour, but it really tastes delicious. And I can't wait to dig in. It's cooling right now in the fridge. After The Haunted House, then we have assorted Christmas books by Charles Dickens. Of course, there's the usual Christmas Carol. Yes, the Christmas Carol, which will probably do that the week of Christmas. And then we're going to see what other Christmas goodies he has in store for us, because I can't think of any other classic public domain Christmas books. I've tried to do searches a few times. I'm sure there are some winter things, and I'll try to figure out, like wintry and family and stuff like that, so I can have some things to do next year and not do a repeat. Although, it would be really awesome to have all of this done over again when I have a good mic. I'm shooting for the, what's it called? The Yeti Nano in blue. It looks so pretty. Alright, I think we're going to go ahead and get started. So I'm going to deactivate the Meowing Maestro. And this is going to be a longer stream today because we're reading 4 stories. 11, 12, 13, and 14. Yeah. Alright, so have fun lurking, and let's go ahead and get started. Case number 11, The Case of the Missing Will. The problem presented us by Miss Violet Marsh made rather a pleasant change from our usual routine work. Poirot had received a brisk and businesslike note from the lady asking for an appointment, and had replied asking her to call upon him at 11 o'clock the following day. She arrived punctually, a tall, handsome young woman, plainly but neatly dressed, with an assured and businesslike manner. Clearly a young woman who meant to get on in the world. I am not a great admirer of the so-called new woman myself, and in spite of her good looks, I was not particularly prepossessed in her favor. My business is of a somewhat unusual nature, Monsieur Poirot, she began, after she had accepted a chair. I had better begin at the beginning and tell you the whole story. If you please, mademoiselle. I am an orphan. My father was one of 2 brothers, sons of a small yeoman farmer in Devonshire. The farm was a poor one, and the elder brother, Andrew, emigrated to Australia, where he did very well indeed, and by means of successful speculation in inland, became a very rich man. The younger brother, Roger, my father, had no learnings towards the agricultural. I don't know why I thought art something. Towards the agricultural life, he managed to educate himself a little and obtained a post as clerk with a small firm. He married slightly above him. My mother was the daughter of a poor artist. My father died when I was 6 years old. When I was 14, my mother followed him to his grave. My only living relation Then was my Uncle Andrew, who had recently returned from Australia and bought a small place, Crabtree Manor, in his native country. He was exceedingly kind to my brother's orphan child, took me to live with him, and treated me in every way as though I was his own daughter. Crabtree Manor, in spite of its name, is really only an old farmhouse. Farming was in my uncle's blood, and he was intensely interested in various modern farming experiments. Although kindness itself to me, he had a certain peculiar and deeply rooted idea as to the upbringing of women. Himself a man of little or no education, though possessing remarkable shrewdness, he placed little value on what he called book knowledge. He was especially opposed to the education of women. In his opinion, girls should learn practical housework and dairy work, be useful about the home, and have as little to do with book learning as possible. He proposed to bring me up on these lines, to my bitter disappointment and annoyance. I rebelled frankly. I knew that I possessed a good brain and had absolutely no talent for domestic duties. My uncle and I had many bitter arguments on the subject, for, though much attached to each other, we were both self-willed. I was lucky enough to win a scholarship, and up to a certain point was successful in getting my own way. The crisis arose when I resolved to go to Girton. I had a little money of my own, left me by my mother, and I was quite determined to make the best use of the gifts God had given me. I had one long, final argument with my uncle. He put the facts plainly before me. He had no other relations, and he had intended me to be his sole heiress. As I have told you, he was a very rich man. If I persisted in these new-fangled notions of mine, however, I need look for nothing from him. I remained polite but firm. I should always be deeply attached to him, I told him, but I must lead my own life. We parted on that note. "You fancy your brains, my girl," were his last words. "I've no book learning, but for all that, I'll pit mine against yours any day. We'll see what we shall see." That was 9 years ago. I've stayed with him for a weekend occasionally, and our relations were perfectly amicable, though his views remained unaltered. I never referred to my having matriculated, nor to my BSc. For the last 3 years his health has been failing, and a month ago he died. I am now coming to the point of my visit. My uncle left a most extraordinary will. By its terms, Crabtree Manor and its contents are to be at my disposal for a year from his death, during which time my clever niece may prove her wits. The actual words run: "At the end of that period, my wits having been proved better than hers, the house and all my uncle's large fortune pass to various charitable institutions." "That is a little hard on you, mademoiselle, seeing that you are Mr. Marsh's only relation." "I do not look on it in that way. Uncle Andrew warned me fairly, and I chose my own path. Since I should not fall in with his wishes, he was at perfect liberty to leave his money to whom he pleased." Made a rough... sorry, I apparently skipped a page. "Was the will drawn up by a lawyer?" "No, it was written on a printed will form and witnessed by the man and his wife who lived at the house and do for my uncle." "There might be a possibility of upsetting such a will." "I would not even attempt to do such a thing." "You regard it, then, as a sporting challenge on the part of your uncle?" "That is exactly how I look upon it." "It bears that interpretation, certainly," said Poirot thoughtfully. "Somewhere in this rambling old manor house of your uncle has concealed either a sum of money in notes or possibly a second will, and has given you a year in which to exercise your ingenuity to find it." "Exactly, Monsieur Poirot, and I am paying you the compliment of assuming that your ingenuity will be greater than mine." "Ah, that is very charming of you. My grey cells are at your disposal. You have made no search yourself?" "Only a cursory one, but I have too much respect for my uncle's undoubted abilities to fancy that the task will be an easy one. Have you the will or a copy of it with you? Miss March it is Miss March. Miss March handed a document across the table. Poirot ran through it, nodding to himself. Made 3 years ago, dated March 25th, and the time is given also, 11 a.m. That is very suggestive. It narrows the field of search. Assuredly, it is another will we have to seek for. A will made even half an hour later would upset this. Eh bien, mademoiselle, it is a problem, charming and ingenuous, that you have presented to me here. I shall have all the pleasure in the world in solving it for you. Granted that your uncle was a man of ability, his grey cells cannot have been of the quality of Hercule Poirot's. Really, Poirot's vanity is blatant. Fortunately, I have nothing of moment on hand at the minute. Hastings and I will go down to Crabtree Manor tonight. The man and wife who attended on your uncle are still there, I assume? Yes, their name is Baker. Section 2. The following morning saw us started on the hunt proper. We had arrived late the night before. Mr. and Mrs. Baker, having received a telegram from Miss Marsh... Oh, okay, there was a typo. It is Miss Marsh. Having received a telegram from Miss Marsh, were expecting us. They were a pleasant couple, the man gnarled and pink-cheeked like a shriveled pippin, a kind of apple, and his wife a woman of vast proportion and true Devonshire charm. By the way, pippins are my favorite kinds of apples, so I haven't had one in like 20 years, I think. Tired with our journey and the 8-mile drive from the station, we had retired at once to bed after a supper of roast chicken, apple pie, and Devonshire cream. We had now disposed of an excellent breakfast, and were sitting in a small panelled room which had been the late Mr. Marsh's study and living room. A roll-top desk, a big leather armchair showed plainly that it had been A roll-top desk stuffed with papers, all neatly docketed, stood against the wall, and a big leather armchair showed plainly that it had been its owner's constant resting place. A big chintz-covered settee ran along the opposite wall, and the deep, low window seats were covered with the same faded chintz of an old-fashioned pattern. "Oh, hey, honey, how are you doing? Good to see you." I just started this story just a few minutes ago. You haven't missed much. Basically, a woman has been given a challenge in her uncle's will, and we are trying to find his fortune that he has hidden. We have been given a year. "Eh bien, mon ami," said Poirot, lighting one of his tiny cigarettes. "We must map out our plan of campaign. Already I have made a rough survey of the house, but I am of the opinion that any clue will be found in this room. We shall have to go through the documents in the desk with meticulous care. Naturally, I do not expect to find the will amongst them, but it is likely that some apparently innocent paper may conceal the clue to its hiding place. But first we must have a little information. Ring the bell, I pray of you." I did so. While we were waiting for it to be answered, Poirot walked up and down, looking about him approvingly. "A matter of method, this, Mr. Marsh. See how neatly the packets of papers are docketed. Then the key to each drawer has its ivory label, so as the key of the china cabinet on the wall, and see with what precision the china within is arranged. It rejoices the heart. Nothing here offends my eye." He came to an abrupt pause, as his eye was caught by the key of the desk itself, to which a dirty envelope was affixed. Poirot frowned at it and withdrew it from the lock. On it were scrawled the words, "Key of roll-top desk," in a crabbed handwriting, quite unlike the neat superscriptions on the other keys. "An alien note," said Poirot, frowning. "I could swear that here we have no longer the personality of Mr. March. But who else has been in the house? Only Miss March, and she, if I mistake not, is also a young lady of method and order. Baker came in answer to the bell. Will you fetch Madame your wife and answer a few questions? Baker departed, and in a few moments returned with Mrs. Baker, wiping her hands on her apron and beaming all over her face. In a few clear words, Poirot set forth the object of his mission. The Bakers were immediately sympathetic. I still want to see Miss Violet done out of what's hers, declared the woman. Cruel hard 'twould be for hospitals to get it all. Poirot proceeded with his questions. Yes, Mr. and Mrs. Baker remembered perfectly witnessing the will. Oh, he wasn't saying that. Baker had previously been sent into the neighboring town to get 2 printed will forms. 2, said Poirot sharply. Yes, sir, for safety like, I suppose, in case we should spoil one, and sure enough, so he did do. Us had signed one. What time of day was that? Oh, hey, Swags, good to see you. I'm not far into the story. We are trying to solve a clue, or solve a mystery that a woman has been given, like the challenge has been given to her in her will. Not her will, her uncle's will, for her. There we go. I'll chat more between sections. What time of day was that? Baker scratched his head, but his wife was quicker. Why, to be sure, I just put the milk on for the cocoa at 11. Don't you remember? It had all boiled over on the stove when us got back to the kitchen. And afterwards? Okay, have a good lunch. Tell me what you're eating afterwards. And afterwards? 'Twould be about an hour later. Us had to go in again. I've made a mistake, said old master. Had to tear the whole thing up. I'll trouble you to sign again. And us did. And afterwards, master gave us a tidy sum of money each. I've left you nothing in my will, says he, but each year I live, you'll have this to be a nest egg when I'm gone. And sure enough, so he did. Poirot reflected. After you had signed the second time, what did Mr. Marsh do? Do you know? Went out to the village to pay tradesmen's books. That did not seem very promising. Poirot tried another tack. He held out the key of the desk. Is that your master's writing? I may have imagined it, but I fancied that a moment or two elapsed before Baker replied, Yes, sir, it is. He's lying, I thought, but why? Has your master let the house? Have there been any strangers in it during the last 3 years? No, sir. No visitors? Only Miss Violet. No strangers of any kind been inside this room? No, sir. You forget the workmen, Jim, his wife reminded him. Workmen? Poirot wheeled round on her. What workmen? The woman explained that about 2 years and a half ago, workmen had been in the house to do certain repairs. She was quite vague as to what the repairs were. Her view seemed to be that the whole thing was a fad of her master's and quite unnecessary. Part of the time the workmen had been in the study, but what they had done there she could not say, as her master had not let either of them into the room whilst the work was in progress. Unfortunately, they could not remember the name of the firm employed, beyond the fact that it was a Plymouth one. We progress, Hastings, said Poirot, rubbing his hands as the bakers left the room. Clearly he made a second will, and then had workmen from Plymouth in to make a suitable hiding place. Instead of wasting time taking up the floor and tapping the walls, we will go to Plymouth. With a little trouble, we were able to get the information we wanted. After 1 or 2 essays, we found the firm employed by Mr. Marsh. Their employees had all been with them many years, and it was easy to find the 2 men who had worked under Mr. Marsh's orders. They remembered the job perfectly. Amongst various other minor jobs, they had taken up one of the bricks of the old-fashioned fireplace, made a cavity beneath, and so cut the bricks that it was impossible to see the join. By pressing on the second brick from the end, the whole thing was raised. It had been quite a complicated piece of work, and the old gentleman had been very fussy about it. Our informant was a man called Cogan, a big, gaunt man with a grizzled mustache. He seemed an intelligent fellow. We returned to Crabtree Manor in high spirits, and, locking the study door, proceeded to put our newly acquired knowledge into effect. It was impossible to see any sign on the bricks, but when we pressed in the manner indicated, a deep cavity was at once disclosed. Eagerly Poirot plunged in his hand. Suddenly his face fell from complacent elation to consternation. All he held was a charred fragment of stiff paper. But for it the cavity was empty. "Sacre!" cried Poirot angrily. "Someone has been before us." We examined the scrap of paper anxiously. Clearly it was a fragment of what we sought. A portion of Baker's signature remained, but no indication of what the terms of the will had been. Poirot sat back on his heels. His expression would have been comical if he had not been so overcome. "I understand it not," he growled. "What destroyed this? And what was their object?" "Oh, who?" "The Bakers," I suggested. "Pourquoi? Neither will makes any provision for them, and they are more likely to be kept on with Miss Marsh than if the place became the property of a hospital. How could it be to anyone's advantage to destroy the will? The hospital's benefit, yes, but one cannot suspect institutions." "Perhaps the old man changed his will and destroyed it himself," I suggested. Poirot rose to his feet, dusting his knees with his usual care. "That may be," he admitted. "One of your more sensible observations, Hastings. Well, we can do no more here. We have done all that mortal men can do. We have successfully pitted our wits against the late Andrew Marsh's, but unfortunately his niece is not better off for our success." By driving to the station at once, we were just able to catch a train to London, though not the principal express. Poirot was sad and dissatisfied. For my part, I was tired and dozed in a corner. Suddenly, as we were just moving out of Taunton, Poirot uttered a piercing squeal. "Vite, Hastings! Awake and jump up! But jump, I say!" Before I knew where I was, we were standing on the platform, bare-handed and minus our valises, whilst the train disappeared into the night. I was furious, but Poirot paid no attention. "Imbecile that I have been!" he cried. "Triple imbecile! Not again will I vaunt my little grey cells." "That's a good job at any rate," I said grumpily. "But what is this all about?" As usual, when following out his own ideas, Poirot paid absolutely no attention to me. "The tradesmen's books. I have left them entirely out of account." "Yes, but where? Where?" "Never mind, I cannot be mistaken. We must return at once." Easier said than done. We managed to get a slow train to Exeter, and there Poirot hired a car. We arrived back at Crabtree Manor in the small hours of the morning. I pass over the bewilderment of the Bakers when we had at last aroused them. Paying no attention to anybody, Poirot strode at once to the study. "I have been not a triple imbecile, but 36 times one, my friend," he deigned to remark. "Now behold." Going straight to the desk, he drew out the key and detached the envelope from it. I stared at him stupidly. How could he possibly hope to find a big will form in that tiny envelope? With great care he cut open the envelope, laying it out flat. Then he lighted the fire and held the plain inside surface of the envelope to the flame. In a few minutes, faint characters began to appear. "Look, mon ami!" cried Poirot in triumph. I looked. There were just a few lines of faint writing, stating briefly that he left everything to his niece, Violet Marsh. It was dated March 25th, 12:30 p.m., and witnessed by Albert Pike, confectioner, and Jessie Pike, married woman. "But is it legal?" I gasped. As far as I know, there is no law against writing your will in a blend of disappearing and sympathetic ink. The intentions of the testator is clear, and the beneficiary is his only living relation. But the cleverness of him! He foresaw every step that a searcher would take, that I, miserable imbecile, took. He gets 2 will forms, makes the servant sign twice, then sallies out with his will written on the inside of a dirty envelope and a fountain pen containing his little ink mixture. On some excuse, he gets the confectioner and his wife to sign their names under his own signature. Then he ties it to the key of his desk and chuckles to himself. If his niece sees through his little ruse, she will have justified her choice of life and elaborate education, and be thoroughly welcome to his money. She didn't see through, did she? I said slowly. Seems rather unfair. The only man really won. No, Hastings. It is your wits that go astray. Miss Marsh proved the astuteness of her wits and the value of the higher education for women by at once putting the matter in my hands. Always employ the expert. She has amply proved her right to the money. I very much wonder, what old Andrew Marsh would have thought. I'll put up little meowing maestro. So what's for lunch, Swags, if you're still there? I'm quickly gonna get a blanket. Hey, Maestro. Are you enjoying story time? You don't look like you much care. Okay, yes, I did put that there. Like, where did I put the book? I'm so absent-minded sometimes. This might not actually run long. The first case was actually pretty short. It wasn't even a half an hour. All right, we'll go ahead and continue. I hope you're enjoying it so far. Case 12, The Veiled Lady. Part 1. I had noticed that for some time Poirot had been growing increasingly dissatisfied and restless. We had had no interesting cases of late, nothing on which my little friend could exercise his keen wits and remarkable powers of deduction. This morning he flung down the newspaper with an impatient "Tch!" a favorite exclamation of his, which sounded exactly like a cat sneezing. Nice. They fear me, Hastings, the criminals of your England, they fear me. When the cat is here, the little mice, they come no more to the cheese. I don't suppose the greater part of them even know of your existence, I said, laughing. Poirot looked at me reproachfully. He always imagines that the whole world is thinking and talking of Hercule Poirot. He had certainly made a name for himself in London, but I could hardly believe that his existence struck terror into the criminal world. What about that daylight robbery of jewels on Bond Street the other day? I asked. A neat coup, said Poirot approvingly, though not in my line. Pas de finesse, seulement de l'audace. A man with a loaded cane smashes the plate-glass window of a jeweller's shop and grabs a number of precious stones. Worthy citizens immediately seize him. A policeman arrived. He is caught red-handed with the jewels on him. He is marched off to the police, and then it is discovered that the stones are paste. He has passed the real ones to a confederate, one of the aforementioned worthy citizens. He will go to prison, true, but when he comes out, there will be a nice little fortune awaiting him. Yes, not badly imagined, but I could do better than that. Sometimes, Hastings, I regret that I am have such a moral disposition. To work against the law, it would be pleasing for a change. Cheer up, Poirot. You know you are unique in your own line. But what is there on hand in my own line? I picked up the paper. Here's an Englishman mysteriously done to death in Holland, I said. They always say that, and later they find that he ate the tinned fish and that his death is perfectly natural. Well, if you're determined to grouse, tiens, said Poirot, who had strolled across to the window. Here in the street is what they call in novels a heavily veiled lady. She mounts the steps. She rings the bell. She comes to consult us. Here's a possibility of something interesting. When one is as young and pretty as that one does not veil the face except for a big affair. A minute later our visitor was ushered in. As Poirot had said, she was indeed heavily veiled. It was impossible to distinguish her features until she raised her veil of black Spanish lace. Then I saw that Poirot's intuition had been right. The lady was extremely pretty, with fair hair and blue eyes. From the costly simplicity of her attire, I deduced at once that she belonged to the upper strata of society. "Monsieur Poirot," said the lady in a soft, musical voice, "I am in great trouble. I can hardly believe that you can help me, but I have heard such wonderful things of you that I come literally as the last hope to beg you to do the impossible." "The impossible, it pleases me always," said Poirot. "Continue, I beg you, mademoiselle." Our fair guest hesitated. "But you must be frank," added Poirot. "You must not leave me in the dark on any point." "I will trust you," said the girl suddenly. "You have heard of Lady Millicent Castlevaughn?" I looked up with keen interest. The announcement of Lady Millicent's engagement to the young Duke of Southshire had appeared a few days previously. She was, I knew, the fifth daughter of the impecunious Irish peer, and the Duke of Southshire was one of the best matches in England. "I am Lady Millicent," continued the girl. "You may have read of my engagement. I should be one of the happiest girls alive, but, oh, Monsieur Poirot, I am in trouble, terrible trouble. There is a man, a horrible man. His name is Lavington, and I hardly know how to tell you. There was a letter I wrote. I was only 16 at the time, and he... A letter that you wrote to Mr. Lavington?" "Oh, no, not him. To a young soldier. I was very fond of him. He was killed in the war." "I understand," said Poirot kindly. "It was a foolish letter, an indiscreet letter, but indeed, Monsieur Poirot, nothing more. But there are phrases in it which might bear a different interpretation." "I see," said Poirot. "And this letter has come into the possession of Mr. Lavington?" "Yes, and he threatens, unless I pay him an enormous sum of money, a sum that is quite impossible for me to raise, to send it to the Duke." "The dirty swine!" I ejaculated. "I beg your pardon, Lady Millicent. Would it not be safer to confess all to your future husband?" "I dare not, Monsieur Poirot. The Duke is a rather peculiar character, jealous and suspicious, and prone to believe the worst. I might as well break off my engagement at once." "Dear, dear," said Poirot with an expressive grimace. "And what do you want me to do, milady?" "I thought perhaps that I might ask Mr. Lavington to call upon you. I would tell him that you were empowered by me to discuss the matter. Perhaps you could reduce his demands. What sum does he mention? 20,000 pounds? An impossibility. I doubt if I could raise 1,000 even." "You might perhaps borrow the money on the prospect of your approaching marriage, but I doubt if you could get hold of half that sum. Besides, eh bien, it is repugnant to me that you should pay. No, the ingenuity of Hercule Poirot shall defeat your enemies. Send me to Mr. Lavington. Is he likely to bring the letter with him?" The girl shook her head. "I do not think so. He is very cautious." "I suppose there is no doubt that he really has it?" "He showed it to me when I went to his house." "You went to his house? That was very imprudent, milady." "Was it? I was so desperate. I hoped my entreaties might move him. Oh, la la, the Lavingtons of this world are not moved by entreaties. He would welcome them as showing how much importance you attach to the document. Where does he live, this fine gentleman? At Buena Vista, Wimbledon. I went there after dark, Poirot groaned. I declared that I would inform the police in the end, but he only laughed in a horrid, sneering manner. By all means, my dear Lady Millicent, do so if you wish, he said. Yes, it is hardly an affair for the police, murmured Poirot. But I think you will be wiser than that, he continued. See, here is your letter, in this little Chinese puzzle box. He held, but I think you will be wiser than that, he continued. See, here is your letter, in this little Chinese puzzle box. She held it so that I could see. He held it so that I could see. I tried to snatch at it, but he was too quick for me. What a horrid smile! He folded it up and replaced it in the little wooden box. It will be quite safe here, I assure you, he said, and the box itself lives in such a clever place that you would never find it. My eyes turned to a small wall safe, and he shook his head and laughed. I have a better safe than that, he said. Oh, he was odious. Monsieur Poirot, do you think you can help me? Have faith in Papa Poirot. I will find a way. These reassurances were always all very well, I thought, as Poirot gallantly ushered his fair client down the stairs. But it seemed to me that we had a rough nut to crack. I said as much to Poirot when he returned. He nodded ruefully. Welcome back. What's lunch? Oh, and hello, Obvious. Good to see you. I'm going to give a quick shout out to Obvious. Because he is another story timer. And I got to catch some of his, was it yesterday before work or was it the day before? I think it was yesterday before work. Nice. I haven't had a bagel in a while. I used to work at a bagel shop, actually. I'm going to put my little thing up. There we go. Oh, I know I didn't need to do that, but yeah, I like to support my fellow story timers. There aren't many of us, story time people who do story time. That's what I meant. And thank you for supporting me. So, yeah, let's go ahead and continue. I'll chat a bit at the little break. Which actually, I think we're just about there. Yes, the solution does not leap to the eye. He has the whip hand, this Mr. Lavington. For the moment, I do not see how we are to circumvent him. Oh, yes, I will. Thank you, Corral. Good to see you. I almost called you Poirot, Corral. I don't know why. Hydration is key. Thank you. Oh, and I added a new command last night. I realized that I didn't have a command like this yet, so I have that now. All right, let's get back to it, and I will get caught up on chat at the next break. Wow, we have 6 people in here now. Nice. Part 2. Mr. Lavington duly called upon us that afternoon. Lady Millicent had spoken truly that she described him as an odious man. I felt a positive tingling in the end of my boot, so keen was I to kick him down the stairs. He was blustering and overbearing in manner, laughed Poirot's gentle suggestions to scorn, and generally showed himself as master of the situation. I could not help feeling that Poirot was hardly appearing at his best. He looked discouraged and crestfallen. Well, gentlemen, said Lavington as he took up his hat, we don't seem to be getting much further. The case stands like this. I'll let the Lady Millicent off cheap. She is such a charming young lady. He leered odiously. We'll say 18,000. I'm off to Paris today, a little piece of business to attend to over there. I shall be back on Tuesday. Unless the money is paid by Tuesday evening, the letter goes to the Duke. Don't tell me Lady Millicent can't raise the money. Some of her gentlemen friends would be only too willing to oblige such a pretty woman with a loan. She goes the right way about it." My face flushed, and I took a step forward, but Lavington had wheeled out of the room as he finished his sentence. "My God!" I cried. "Something has got to be done. You seem to be taking this lying down, Poirot. You have an excellent heart, my friend, but your grey cells are in a deplorable condition. I have no wish to impress Mr. Lavington with my capabilities. The more the more pusillanimous he thinks me, the better." "Why? It is curious," murmured Poirot reminiscently, "that I should have uttered a wish to work against the law just before Lady Millicent arrived." "You are going to burgle his house while he is away?" I gasped. "Sometimes, Hastings, your mental processes are amazingly quick. Suppose he takes the letter with him?" Poirot shook his head. "That is very unlikely. He has evidently a hiding place in his house that he fancies to be pretty impregnable. When do we do the deed?" "Tomorrow night. We will start from here about 11 o'clock. Part 3. At the time appointed, I was ready to set off. I had donned a dark suit and a soft, dark hat. Poirot beamed kindly on me. "You have dressed the part, I see," he observed. "Come, let us take the underground to Wimbledon. Aren't we going to take anything with us? Tools to break in with?" "My dear Hastings, Hercule Poirot does not adopt such crude methods." I retired, snubbed, but my curiosity was alert. It was just on midnight that we entered the small suburban garden of Buena Vista. The house was dark and silent. Poirot went straight to a window at the back of the house, raised the sash noiselessly, and bade me enter. "How did you know this window would be open?" I whispered, for really it seemed uncanny. "Because I sawed through the catch this morning." "What?" "But yes, it was most simple. I called, presented a fictitious card and one of Inspector Japp's official ones. I said I had been sent, recommended by Scotland Yard, to attend to some burgle-proof fastenings that Mr. Lavington wanted fixed while he was away. The housekeeper welcomed me with enthusiasm. It seems they have had 2 attempted burglaries here lately. Evidently our little idea has occurred to other clients of Mr. Lavington's, with nothing of value taken. I examined all the windows, made my little arrangement, forbade the servants to touch the window until tomorrow, as they were electrically connected up, and withdrew gracefully." "Really, Poirot, you are wonderful." "Mon ami, it was of the simplest. Now to work. The servants sleep at the top of the house, so we will run little risk of disturbing them." "I presume the safe is built into the wall somewhere." "Safe? Fiddlesticks. There is no safe. Mr. Lavington is an intelligent man. You will see. He will have devised a hiding place much more intelligent than a safe. A safe is the first thing everyone looks for." Whereupon we began a systematic search of the entire place. But after several hours' ransacking of the house, our search had been unavailing. I saw symptoms of anger gathering on Poirot's face. "Sapristi! Is Hercule Poirot to be beaten? Never! Let us be calm. Let us reflect. Let us reason. Let us, enfin, employ our little grey cells." He paused for some moments, bending his brows in consternation. Then the green light I knew so well stole into his eyes. "I have been an imbecile. The kitchen!" "The kitchen!" I cried. "But that's impossible! The servants!" "Exactly. Just what 99 people out of 100 would say, and for that very reason the kitchen is the ideal place to choose. It is full of various homely objects. En avant to the kitchen!" I followed him, completely skeptical. Yes, it is that word. Sorry. I followed him, completely skeptical, and watched whilst he dived into bread bins, tapped saucepans, and put his head into the gas oven. In the end, tired of watching him, I strolled back to the study. I was convinced that there, and there only, would we find the cache. I made a further minute search, noted that it was now 4:15, and that therefore it would soon be growing light, and then went back to the kitchen regions. To my utter amazement, Poirot was now standing right inside the coal bin, to the utter ruin of his neat, light suit. He made a grimace. "But yes, friend, it is against all my instincts to ruin my appearance, but what will you? Lavington can't have buried it under the coal. If you would use your eyes, you would see that it is not the coal that I examine." I then saw on a shelf behind the coal bunker some logs of wood were piled. Poirot had dexterously taking them down one by one. Suddenly he uttered a low exclamation. "Your knife, Hastings!" I handed it to him. He appeared to insert it in the wood, and suddenly the log split in two. It had been neatly sawed in half, and a cavity hollowed out in the center. From this cavity Poirot took a little wooden box of Chinese make. "Well done!" I cried, carried out of myself. "Gently, Hastings, do not raise your voice too much. Come, let us be off before the daylight is upon us." Slipping the box into his pocket, he leaped lightly out of the coal bunker, brushed himself down as well as he could, and leaving the house by the way as he had come, he walked rapidly in the direction of London. "What an extraordinary place!" I expostulated. Anyone might have used the logs. "In July, Hastings? And it is at the bottom of the pile, a very ingenious hiding place. Ah, here is a taxi. Come for home, a wash and a refreshing sleep." Part 4. After the excitement of the night, I slept late. When I finally strolled into our sitting room just before 1 o'clock, I was surprised to see Poirot leaning back in an armchair, the Chinese box open beside him, calmly reading the letter he had taken from it. He smiled at me affectionately and tapped the sheet he held. "She was right, the Lady Millicent. Never would the Duke have pardoned this letter. It contains some of the most extravagant terms of affection I have ever come across." "Really, Poirot," I said rather disgustedly, "I don't think you should have read the letter. That's the sort of thing that isn't done." "It is done by Hercule Poirot," replied my friend imperturbably. "And another thing," I said, "I don't think using Japp's official card yesterday was quite playing the game." "But I was not playing the game, Hastings. I was conducting a case." I shrugged my shoulders. One can't argue with a point of view. "A step on the stairs," said Poirot. "That would be Lady Millicent." Our fair client came in with an anxious expression on her face, which changed to one of delight on seeing the letter and box which Poirot held up. "Oh, Monsieur Poirot, how wonderful of you! How did you do it?" "By rather reprehensible methods, milady, but Mr. Lavington will not prosecute. That is your letter, is it not?" She glanced through it. "Yes." "Oh, how can I ever thank you? You are a wonderful, wonderful man. Where was it hidden?" Poirot told her. "How very clever of you!" She took up the small box from the table. "I shall keep this as a souvenir. I had hoped, milady, that you would permit me to keep it, also as a souvenir." "I hope to send you a better souvenir than that. On my wedding day, you shall not find me ungrateful, Monsieur Poirot. The pleasure of doing you a service will be more to me than a check. Do you permit that I retain the box?" "Oh, no, Monsieur Poirot, I simply must have it," she cried laughingly. She stretched out her hand, but Poirot was before her. His hand closed over it. "I think not." His voice had changed. "What do you mean?" Her voice seemed to have grown sharper. "At any rate, permit me to abstract its further contents. You observe that the original cavity has been reduced by half. In the top half, the compromising letter. In the bottom—" He made a nimble gesture, then held out his hand. On the palm were 4 large glittering stones and 2 big milky white pearls. "Pearls stolen on Bond Street the other day, I rather fancy," murmured Poirot. "Japp will tell us." To my utter amazement, Japp himself stepped out from Poirot's bedroom. "An old friend of yours, I believe," said Poirot, pointing to Lady Millicent. "Nabbed by the Lord," said Lady Millicent with a complete change of manner. "You nippy old devil!" She looked at Poirot with almost affectionate awe. "Well, Gertie, my dear," said Japp, "the game's up this time, I fancy. Fancy seeing you again so soon. You've got your pal, too, the gentleman who called here the other day was calling himself Lavington. As for Lavington himself, alias Crocker, alias Reed, I wonder which of the gang it was who stuck a knife into him the other day in Holland. Thought he'd got the goods with him, didn't you? And he hadn't. He double-crossed you properly. Hid him in his own house. You had 2 fellows looking for him, and then you tackled Mr. Poirot here, and by a piece of amazing luck he found them." "You do like talking, don't you?" said the late Lady Millicent. "Easy there now, I'll go quietly. You can't say that I'm not the perfect lady. Ta-ta all." "The shoes were wrong," said Poirot dreamily, while I was still too stupefied to speak. "I have made my little observations of your English nation, and a lady, a born lady, is always particular about her shoes. She may have shabby clothes, but she will be well shod. Now, this Lady Millicent had smart, expensive clothes and cheap shoes. It was not likely that either you or I had seen the real Lady Millicent. She has been very little in London, and this girl had a certain superficial resemblance which would pass well enough. As I say, the shoes first awakened my suspicion, and then her story and her veil were a little melodramatic, eh? The Chinese box with a bogus compromising letter in the top must have been known to all the gang, but the log of wood was the late Mr. Lavington's idea. Par exemple, Hastings, I hope you will not again wound my feelings as you did yesterday by saying that I am unknown to the criminal class. Ma foi, they even employ me when they themselves fail." I like that. That was a fun one. All right. Case 13, The Lost Mine. I laid down my bank book with a sigh. This is a curious thing, I observed, but my overdraft never seems to grow any less. "And it perturbs you not? Me, if I had an overdraft, never should I close my eyes all night," declared Poirot. "You deal in comfortable balances, I suppose," I retorted. £444, 4 and 4pence, said Poirot with some complacency. "A neat figure, is it not?" "It must be tact on the part of your bank manager. He is evidently acquainted with your passion for symmetrical details. What about investing, say, 300 of it to the Porcupine oil fields? Their prospectus, which is advertised in the papers today, say that they will pay 100% dividends next year." "Not for me," said Poirot, shaking his head. "I like not the sensational. For me the safe, the prudent investments, le rent, the consols, the, how do you call it, the conversion." "Have you never made a speculative investment?" "No, mon ami," replied Poirot severely. "I have not. And the only shares I own, which have not what you call the gilded edges, are 14,000 shares in the Burma Mines Limited." Poirot paused with an air of waiting to be encouraged to go on. "Yes," I prompted. "And for them I paid no cash, No, they were the reward of the exercise of my little grey cells. You would like to hear the story, yes? Of course I would. These mines are situated in the interior of Burma, about 200 miles inland from Rangoon. They were discovered by the Chinese in the 15th century and worked down to the time of the Mohammedan rebellion, being finally abandoned in the year 1868. The Chinese extracted the rich lead-silver oil from the upper part of the ore body, smelting it for the silver alone, and leaving large quantities of rich lead-bearing slag. This, of course, was soon discovered when prospecting work was carried out in Burma, but owing to the fact that the old workings had become full of loose filling and water, all attempts to find the source of the ore proved fruitless. Many parties were sent out by syndicates, and they dug over a large area, but this rich prize still eludes them. But as a representative Many parties were sent out by syndicates, and they dug over a large area, but this rich prize still eluded them. But a representative of one of the syndicates got on the track of a Chinese family who was supposed to have still kept a record of the situation of the mine. A present head of the family is one, Wu Ling. What a fascinating page of commercial romance, I exclaimed. Is it not? Ah, mon ami, one can have romance without golden-haired girls of matchless beauty. No, I am not wrong. It is auburn hair that so excites you always. You remember... Go on with the story, I said hastily. Eh bien, my friend, this Wu Ling has approached. He was an estimable merchant, much respected in the province where he lived. He admitted at once that he owned the documents in question and was perfectly prepared to negotiate for this sale, but he objected to dealing with anyone other than principals. Finally, it was arranged that he should journey to England and meet the directors of an important company. Wu Ling made the journey to England in the SS Assunta, and the Assunta docked at Southampton on a cold, foggy morning in November. One of the directors, Mr. Pearson, went down to Southampton to meet the boat, but owing to the fog, the train down was very much delayed, and by the time he arrived, Wu Ling had disembarked and left by special train for London. Mr. Pearson returned to town somewhat annoyed, as he had no idea where the Chinaman proposed to stay. Later in the day, however, the officials of the company were rung up on the telephone. Wu Ling was staying at the Russell Square Hotel. He was feeling somewhat unwell after the voyage, but declared himself perfectly able to attend the board meeting on the following day. The meeting of the board took place at 11 o'clock. When 11:30 came and Wu Ling had not put in an appearance, the secretary rang up the Russell Hotel. In answer to his inquiries, he was told that the Chinaman had gone out with a friend about 10:30. It seemed clear that he had started out with the intention of coming to the meeting, but the morning wore away and he did not appear. It was, of course, possible that he had lost his way, being unacquainted with London, but at a late hour that night he had not returned to the hotel. Thoroughly alarmed, now Mr. Pearson put matters into the hands of the police. On the following day there was still no trace of the missing man, but towards evening of the day after that again, a body was found in the Thames which proved to be that of the ill-fated Wu Ling. Neither on the body nor in the luggage at the hotel was there any trace of the papers relating to the mine. At this juncture, mon ami, I was brought into the affair. Mr. Pearson called upon me. While profoundly shocked by the death of Wu Ling, his chief anxiety was to recover the papers which were the object of the Chinaman's visit to England. The main anxiety of the police, of course, would be to track down the murderer. The recovery of the papers would be a secondary consideration. What he wanted me to do was to cooperate with the police while acting in the interests of the company. I consented readily enough. It was clear that there were two fields of search open to me. On the one hand, I might look among the employees of the company who knew of the Chinaman's coming. On the other, among the passengers on the boat who might have been acquainted with his mission. I started with the second, as being a narrower field of search. In this I coincided with Inspector Miller, who was in charge of the case. A man altogether different from our friend Jap, conceited, ill-mannered, and quite insufferable. Together we interviewed the officers of the ship. They had little to tell us. Wu Ling had kept much to himself on the voyage. He had been intimate with but two of the other passengers, one a broken-down European named Dyer, who appeared to bear a somewhat unsavory reputation, the other a young bank clerk named Charles Lester, who was returning from Hong Kong. We were lucky enough to obtain snapshots of both these men. At the moment there seemed little doubt that if either of the two were implicated, Dyer was the man. He was known to be mixed up with a gang of Chinese crooks, and were altogether a most likely suspect. Our next step was to visit the Russell Square Hotel. Shown a snapshot of Wu Ling, they recognized him at once. We then showed them the snapshot of Dyer, but to our disappointment, the hall porter declared positively that that was not the man who had come to the hotel on the fatal morning. Almost as an afterthought, I produced the photograph of Lester, and to my surprise, the man at once recognized him. "Yes, sir," he asserted. "That's the gentleman who came in at 10:30 and asked for Mr. Wu Ling, and afterwards went out with him." The affair was progressing. Our next move was to interview Mr. Charles Lester. He met us with the utmost frankness, was desolated to hear of the Englishman's untimely death, and put himself at our disposal in every way. His story was as follows. By arrangement with Wu Ling, he called for him at the hotel at 10:30. Wu Ling, however, did not appear. Instead, his servant came, explaining that his master had had to go out, and offered to conduct the young man to where his master now was. Suspecting nothing, Lester agreed, and the Chinaman procured a taxi. They drove off for some time in the direction of the docks. Suddenly, becoming mistrustful, Lester stopped the taxi and got out, disregarding the servant's protests. That, he assured us, was all he knew. Apparently satisfied, we thanked him and took our leave. His story was soon proved to be somewhat an inaccurate one. To begin with, Wu Ling had had no servants with him, either on the boat or at the hotel. In the second place, the taxi driver who had driven the two men on that morning came forward. Far from Lester's having left the taxi en route, he and the Chinese gentleman had driven to a certain unsavory dwelling place in Limehouse, right in the heart of Chinatown. The place in question was more or less well known as an opium den to the lowest description. The two gentlemen had gone in about an hour after the English gentleman, whom he identified from the photograph, came out alone. He looked very pale and ill, and directed the taxi-man to take him to the nearest underground station. Inquiries were made about Charles Lester's standing, and it was found that, though bearing an excellent character, he was heavily in debt, and had a secret passion for gambling. Dyer, of course, was not lost sight of. It seems just faintly possible that he might have impersonated the other man, but that idea was proved utterly groundless. His alibi for the whole of the day in question was absolutely unimpeachable. Of course, the proprietor of the opium den denied everything within Oriental solidarity. He had never seen Charles Lester. No two gentlemen had been to the place that morning. In any case, the police were wrong. No opium was ever smoked there. His denials, however well meant, did little to help Charles Lester. He was arrested for the murder of Wu Ling. A search of his effects was made, but no papers relating to the mine were discovered. The proprietor of the opium den was also taken into custody, but the cursory raid of his premises wielded nothing. Not even a stick of opium rewarded the zeal of the police. In the meantime, my friend Mr. Pearson was in a great state of agitation. He strode up and down my room, uttering great lamentations. "But you must have some idea, Monsieur Poirot," he kept urging. "Surely you must have some ideas." "Certainly I have ideas," I replied cautiously. "But it is the trouble. One has too many. Therefore they all lead in different directions." "For instance," he suggested. "For instance, the taxi driver. We have only his word for it that he drove the two men to the house. That is one idea. Then, was it really that house they went to? Supposing that they left the taxi there, passed through the house, and went by another entrance and went elsewhere." Mr. Pearson seemed struck by that. "But you do nothing but sit and think. Can we do nothing?" He was of an impatient temperament, you comprehend. "Monsieur," I said with dignity, "it is not for a Poirot to run up and down the evil-smelling streets of Limehouse like a little dog of no breeding. Be calm. My agents are at work." On the following day I had news from him. The two men had indeed passed through the house in question, but their real objection was a small eating-house close to the river. They were seen to pass in there and Lester came out alone. And then, figure to yourself, Hastings, an idea of the most unreasonable seized this Mr. Pearson. Nothing would suit him but that we should go ourselves to this eating-house and make investigations. I argued and prayed, but he would not listen. He talked of disguising himself. He even suggested that I hesitate to say it, should shave off my mustache. Yes, Leander, I pointed out to him that was an idea ridiculous and absurd. One destroys not a thing of beauty wantonly. Besides, since not a Belgian gentleman with a mustache desired to see life and smoke opium just as readily as one without a mustache? Oh, shall not. Yeah, gotcha. Eh bien, he gave in on that, but I still insisted on his project. He insisted on his project. He turned up that evening. Oh dear, what a figure! He wore what he called the pea jacket. His chin, it was dirty and unshaven. He had a scarf of the vilest that offended the nose. And figure to yourself, was he enjoying himself? Truly, the English are mad. He made some changes in his own appearance. I permitted it. Can one argue with a maniac? We started out, after all. Could I let him go alone? A child dressed up to act the charades? Of course you couldn't, I replied. To continue, we arrived. Mr. Pearson talked English of the strangest. He represented himself to be a man of the sea. He talked of lubbers and foxels, and I know not what. It was a low little room with many Chinese in it. We ate of peculiar dishes. Adieu, mon estomac. Poirot clasped that portion of his anatomy before continuing. Then there came to us the proprietor, a Chinaman with a face of evil smiles. "You gentlemen no like food here," he said. "You come for what you like better. Peace pipe, eh?" Mr. Pearson, he gave me the great kick under the table. He had on the boots of the sea, too, and he said, "I don't mind if you do, John. Lead ahead." The China person smiled, and he took us through a door into a cellar, and through a trap-door, and down some steps, and up again into a room all full of divans and cushions of the most comfortable. We lay down, and the Chinese boy took off our boots. It was the best moment of the evening. Then they brought us the opium pipes and cooked the opium pills, and we pretended to smoke, and then hang on a second. and then to sleep and dream. But when we were alone, Mr. Pearson called softly to me. Immediately he began crawling along the floor. We went into another room where other people were asleep, and so on until we heard two men talking. We stayed behind a curtain and listened. They were speaking of Wu Ling. "What about the papers?" said one. "Mr. Lester, he takes those," answered the other, who was a Chinaman. "He says, put them all in safe place, where policemen don't look." "Ah, but he's nabbed," said the first one. "He'll get free. Policemen are not sure he has done it." There was more of the same kind of thing. Then apparently the two men were coming our way, and we scuttled back to our beds. "We'd better get out of here," said Pearson. After a few minutes, years elapsed. "This place isn't healthy." "You are right, monsieur," I agreed. "You have played the farce long enough." We succeeded in getting away all right, paying handsomely for our smoke. Once clear of Limehouse, Pearson drew a long breath. "I am glad to get out of that," said he. "But it's something to be sure." "It is indeed," I agreed, "and I fancy that we shall not have much difficulty in finding what we want after this evening's masquerade." "And there was no difficulty whatsoever," finished Poirot suddenly. This abrupt ending seemed so extraordinary that I stared at him. But where were they?" I asked. "In his pocket, tout simplement." "But in whose pocket?" "Mr. Pearson's, parbleu!" Then, observing my look of bewilderment, he continued gently, "You do not see it? Mr. Pearson, like Charles Lester, was in debt. Mr. Pearson, like Charles Lester, was fond of gambling, and he conceived the idea of stealing the papers from Wu Ling. He met him all right at Southampton, came up to London with him, and took him straight to Limehouse. It was foggy that day. Wu Ling would not notice where he was going. I fancy Mr. Pearson smoked the opium fairly often down there, and had some peculiar friends in consequence. I do not think he meant murder. His idea was that one of the Chinese should impersonate Wu Ling and receive the money for the sale of their document. So far, so good. But to the Oriental mind, it was infinitely simpler to kill Wu Ling and throw his body into the river, and Pearson's Chinese accomplices followed their own methods without consulting him. Imagine, then, that you would call the funk bleu of Mr. Pearson. Someone may have seen him in the train with Wu Ling. Murder is a very different thing from simple abduction. His salvation lies with the Chinese who is personating Wu Ling at the Russell Square Hotel, if only the body is not discovered too soon. Possibly Wu Ling had told him of the arrangement between him and Charles Lester. Thereby the latter was to call for him at the hotel. Pearson sees there an excellent way of diverting suspicion from himself. Charles Lester shall be the last person to be seen in the company of Wu Ling. The impersonator has orders to represent himself to Lester as the servant of Wu Ling, and to bring him as speedily as possible to Limehouse. There, very likely, he was offered a drink. The drink would be suitably drugged, and when Lester emerged an hour later, he would have a very hazy impression of what had happened. So much was this the case, that as soon as Lester learned of Wu Ling's death, he loses his nerve and denies that he ever reached Limehouse. By that, of course, he plays right into Pearson's hands. But is Pearson content? No. My manner disquiets him, and he determines to complete the case against Lester. So he arranges an elaborate masquerade. Me, I am to be gulled completely. Did I not say just now that he was a child acting the charades? Eh bien, I play my part. He goes home rejoicing, but in the morning Inspector Miller arrives on his doorstep. The papers are found on him. The game is up. bitterly he rejects permitting himself to play farce with Hercule Poirot. There was only one real difficulty in the affair. What was that? I demanded curiously. Convincing Inspector Miller. What an animal that! Both obstinate and imbecile. And in the end, he took all the credit. Too bad, I cried. Ah, well, I had my compensations. The other director of the Burma Mines Limited awarded me 14,000 shares as a small recompense for my services. Not so bad, eh? But when investing money, keep, I beg of you, Hastings, strictly to the conservative. The things you read in the paper, they are not to be true. The directors of the Porcupine, they may be so many Mr. Pearsons. Just taking a small break. We have quite the number of viewers right now. There are 9 of you out there. So hello. If you are joining us for the first time, I am Sunny, and of course, as you can see, I do a story time. I also do, here and there, some gaming streams, and I'm going to be doing an art stream soon, hopefully. We have one more story left of Poirot Investigates, and then, starting on Monday, we're going to be reading The Haunted House by Charles Dickens, which is a Christmas story, despite it sounding like a Halloween story. I'm really interested to see how that turns out. I'm hoping sometime this weekend, maybe Monday night or Sunday night, we'll see, of doing an art stream, and I'll let you know when that's going to happen, because I want to have some Christmas illustrations up when we do our holiday themed story time this month. It's hard to believe that it is the beginning of December. So I'm going to quickly put up, oh, hang on, that wasn't clicked on anything. These are the links to all my socials, my Twitter and Discord, and I have a Goodreads. So if you have a Goodreads account and like to see what your friends are reading, that's where I have mine up. Anyways, yeah, let's go ahead and get started. Oh, hang on a second. Somebody is hailing me. Okay, sorry about that. Just doing a little hydration. All right. So we'll go ahead and hide our little meowing maestro. I have him up when I am chatting between chapters or between stories. Case 14, The Chocolate Box. It was a wild night. Outside, the wind howled Outside, the wind howled malevolently, and the rain beat against the windows in great gusts. Poirot and I sat facing the hearth, our legs stretched out to the cheerful blaze. Between us was a small table. On my side of it stood some careful brewed hot toddy. On Poirot's was a cup of thick, rich chocolate which I could not have drunk for 100 pounds. Poirot sipped the thick brown mess in the pink china cup and sighed with contentment. "Quel bien vie," he murmured. "Yes, it's a good old world," I agreed. "Here am I with a job, and a good job, too. And here are you, famous." "Ah, mon ami," protested Poirot. "But you are, and rightly so. When I think back on your long line of successes, I am positively amazed. I don't believe you know what failure is." "You would be a droll kind of original who would say that." "No, but seriously, have you ever failed?" "Immeasurable times, my friend." "What would you? La bonne chance? It cannot always be on your side. I have been called in too late. Very often another working towards the same goal has arrived there first. Twice have I been stricken down with illness just as I was on the point of success. One must take the downs with the ups, my friend." I didn't quite mean that, I said. I meant, had you ever been completely down and out over a case through your own fault? Ah, I comprehend. You ask if I have ever made the complete prize ass of myself, as you say over here. Once, my friend? A slow, reflective smile hovered over his face. Yes, once I made a fool of myself. He sat up suddenly in his chair. See here, my friend, you have, I know, kept a record of my little successes. You shall add one more story to the collection, the story of a failure. He leaned forward and placed a log on the fire. Then, after carefully wiping his hands on a little duster that hung on a nail by the fireplace, he leaned back and commenced his story. That of which I tell you, said Monsieur Poirot, took place in Belgium many years ago. It was at the time of the terrible struggle in France between church and state. Monsieur Paul Déroulard was a French deputy of note. It was an open secret that the portfolio of the minister awaited him. He was among the bitterest of the anti-Catholic party, and it was certain that on his ascension to power he would have to face violent enmity. He was in many ways a peculiar man. Though he never drank nor smoked, he was nevertheless not so scrupulous in other ways. You comprehend, Hastings. C'était des femmes, toujours des femmes. It was the women, always the women. He had married some years earlier a young lady from Brussels who had brought him a substantial dot. Undoubtedly, the money was useful to him in his career, as his family was not rich, though on the other hand he was entitled to call himself Monsieur le Baron, if he chose. There were no children of the marriage, and his wife died after 2 years, the result of a fall downstairs. Among the property which she bequeathed to him was a house on the Avenue Louis in Brussels. It was in this house that his sudden death took place, the event coinciding with the resignation of the minister whose portfolio he was to inherit. All the papers printed long notices of his career. His death, which had taken place quite suddenly in the evening after dinner, was attributed to heart failure. At that time, mon ami, I was, as you know, a member of the Belgian detective force. The death of Monsieur Paul Déroulard was not particularly interesting to me. I am, as you also know, bon Catholique, and his demise seemed to me fortunate. It was some 3 days afterwards, when my vacation had just begun, that I received a visitor at my own apartments, a lady heavily veiled, but evidently quite young, and I perceived at once that she was a jeune fille tout à fait comme il faut. Let's see, a young lady, and then I am a little fuzzy on the rest. I don't know. Anyways. You are Monsieur Hercule Poirot? She asked in a low, sweet voice. I bowed. Of the detective service. Again I bowed. Be seated, I pray you, mademoiselle, I said. She accepted a chair and drew aside her veil. Her face was charming, though marred with tears, and haunted as though with some poignant anxiety. Haunted. Monsieur, she said, I understand that you are now taking a vacation. Therefore you will be free to take up a private case. You understand that I do not wish to call in the police. I shook my head. I fear what you ask is impossible, mademoiselle. Even though on vacation, I am still of the police. She leaned forward. Écoutez, monsieur, listen. All that I ask of you is to investigate. The result of your investigations you are at perfect liberty to report to the police. If what I believe to be true is true, we shall need all the machinery of the law. That placed a somewhat different complexion on the matter, and I placed myself at her services without more ado. A slight colour rose to her cheeks. I thank you, monsieur. It is the death of Monsieur Paul Déroulard that I ask you to investigate. Comment? I exclaimed, surprised. Monsieur, I have nothing to go upon, nothing but my woman's instinct. But I am convinced, I tell you, that Monsieur Deroulard did not die a natural death. But surely the doctors may be mistaken. He was so robust, so strong. Ah, Monsieur Poirot, I beseech of you to help me. The poor child was almost beside herself. She should have knelt to me. I soothed her as best I could. I will help you, mademoiselle. I feel almost sure that your fears are unfounded, but we will see. First, I will ask you to describe to me the inmates of the house. There are the domestics, of course, Ginette, Felice, and Denise, the cook. She has been there many years. The others are simple country girls. Also, there is Francois, but he too is an old servant. Then there is Monsieur Deroulard's mother, who lived with him, and myself. My name is Virginie Menard. I am a poor cousin of the late Madame Deroulard, Monsieur Paul's wife, and I have been a member of their ménage for over 3 years. I have now described to you the household. There were also 2 guests staying in the house. And they were Monsieur de Saint-Allard, the neighbor of Monsieur Deroulard in France, also an English friend, Mr. John Wilson. Are they still with you? Mr. Wilson, yes, but Monsieur de Saint-Allard departed yesterday. And what is your plan, Mademoiselle Menard? If you will present yourself at the house in half an hour's time, I will have arranged some story to account for your presence. I had better represent you to be connected with journalism in some way. I shall say that you have come from Paris, and that you have brought a card of introduction from Monsieur de Saint-Allard. Madame Deroulard is very feeble in health, and will pay little attention to details. On Mademoiselle's ingenious pretext, I was admitted to the house, and after a brief interview with the dead deputy's mother, who was a wonderfully imposing and aristocratic figure, though obviously in failing health, I was made free of the premises. I wonder, my friend, continued Poirot, whether you can possibly figure to yourself the difficulties of my task. Here was a man whose death had taken place 3 days previously. If there had been foul play, only one possibility was admissible: poison. And I had no chance of seeing the body, and there was no possibility of examining or analyzing any medium in which the poison could have been administered. There were no clues, false or otherwise, to consider. Had the man been poisoned? Had he died a natural death? I, Hercule Poirot, with nothing to help me, had to decide. First I interviewed the domestics, and with their aid I recapitulated the evening. I paid especial notice to the food at dinner and the method of serving it. The soup had been served by Monsieur Deroulard himself from the tureen. Next a dish of cutlets, then a chicken. Finally a compote of fruit, and all placed on the table and served by Monsieur himself. The coffee was brought in a big pot to the dinner table. Nothing there, mon ami. Impossible to poison one without poisoning all. After dinner, Madame Deroulard had retired to her own apartments, and Mademoiselle Virginie had accompanied her. The 3 men had adjourned to Monsieur Deroulard's study. Here they had chatted amicably for some time, when suddenly, without any warning, the deputy had fallen heavily to the ground. Monsieur de Saint-Allard had rushed out and told Francois to fetch the doctor immediately. He said it was without doubt an apoplexy, explained the man. But when the doctor arrived, the patient was past help. Mr. John Wilson, to whom I was presented by Mademoiselle Virginie, was what was known in those days as a regular John Bull Englishman, middle-aged and burly. His account, delivered in very British French, was substantially the same. Déroulard went very red in the face, and down he fell. There was nothing further to be found out there. Next I went to the scene of the tragedy, the study, and was left alone there at my own request. So far there was nothing to support Mademoiselle Menard's theory. I could not but believe that it was a delusion on her part. Evidently she had entertained a romantic passion for the dead man which had not permitted her to take a normal view of the case. Nevertheless, I searched the study with meticulous care. It was just possible that a hypodermic needle might have been introduced into the dead man's chair in such a way as to allow of a fatal injection. The minute puncture The minute puncture it would cause was likely to remain unnoticed, but I could discover no signs to support the theory. I flung myself down in the chair with a gesture of despair. "Enfin, I abandon it," I said aloud. "There's not a clue anywhere. Everything is perfectly normal." As I said the words, my eyes fell on a large box of chocolates standing on the table nearby, and my heart gave a leap. It might not be a clue to Monsieur Déroulard's death, but here at least was something that was not normal. I lifted the lid. The box was full, untouched, not a chocolate was missing. But that only made the peculiarity that had caught my eye more striking. For see you, Hastings, while the box itself was pink, the lid was blue. Now, one often sees a blue ribbon on a pink box and vice versa, but a box of one color and a lid of another. Oh, decidedly. Ça ne se voit jamais. That is never seen. I did not as yet see that this little incident was of any use to me, yet I determined to investigate it as being out of the ordinary. I rang the bell for Francois, and asked him if his late master had been fond of sweets. A faint melancholy smile came to his lip. "Passionately fond of them, monsieur. He would always have a box of chocolates in the house. He did not drink wine of any kind, you see." "Yet this box has not been touched?" I lifted the lid to show him. "Pardon, monsieur, but that was a new box purchased on the day of his death, the other being nearly finished." "Then the other box was finished on the day of his death," I said slowly. "Yes, monsieur. I found it empty in the morning and threw it away." "Did Mr. Déroulard eat sweets at all hours of the day?" "Usually after dinner, monsieur." I began to see light. "Francois," I said, "you can be discreet, if there is need, monsieur." "Bon! Know then that I am of the police. Can you find me that other box?" "Without doubt, monsieur, it will be in the dustbin." He departed and returned in a few minutes with a dust-covered object. It was the duplicate box I held, save for the fact that this time the box was blue and the lid was pink. I thanked Francois, recommended him once again to be discreet, and left the house in the Avenue Louis without more ado. Next I called upon the doctor who had attended Monsieur Déroulard. With him I had a difficult task. He entrenched himself prettily behind a wall of learned phraseology, but I fancied that he was not quite as sure about the case as he would like to be. "There have been many curious occurrences of the kind," he observed, when I had managed to disarm him somewhat. "A sudden fit of anger, violent emotion, after a heavy dinner, c'est entendu. Then, with an access of rage, the blood flies to the head, and psst, there you are." "But Monsieur Déroulard had no violent emotion." "No? I am sure that he had been having a stormy altercation with Monsieur de Saint-Allard." "Why should he?" "C'est évident," said the doctor. who shrugged his shoulders. Was not Monsieur de Saint-Alard a Catholic of the most fanatical? Their friendship was being ruined by this question of church and state. Not a day passed without discussion. To Monsieur de Saint-Alard, Déroulard appeared almost as Antichrist. This was unexpected and gave me food for thought. One more question, Doctor. Would it be possible to introduce a fatal dose of poison into a chocolate? It would be possible, I suppose, said the doctor slowly. Pure prussic acid would meet the case if there were no chance of evaporation, and a tiny globule of anything might be swallowed unnoticed. But it does not seem a very likely supposition. A chocolate full of morphine or strychnine? He made a wry face. You comprehend, Monsieur Poirot. One bite would be enough. The unwary one would not stand upon ceremony. Thank you, Monsieur le Docteur. I withdrew. Next I made inquiries of the chemists, especially those in the neighborhood of the Avenue Louis. It is good to be of the police. I got the information I wanted without any trouble. Only in one case could I hear of any poison having been supplied to the house in question. This was some eye drops of atropine sulfate for Madame Déroulard. Atropine is a potent poison, and for the moment I was elated, but the symptoms of atropine poisoning are closely allied to those of ptomaine, and bear no resemblance to those I was studying. Besides, the prescription was an old one. Madame Déroulard had suffered from cataracts in both eyes for many years. I was turning away discouraged when the chemist's voice called back, "Un moment, Monsieur Poirot. I remember the girl who brought that prescription. She said something about having to go on to the English chemist. You might try them." I did. Once more enforcing my official status, I got the information I wanted. On the day before Monsieur Déroulard's death, they had made up a prescription for Mr. John Wilson. Not that there was any making up about it. They were simply little tablets of trinitrine. I asked if I might see some. He showed me them, and my heart beat faster, for the tiny tablets were of chocolate. "Is it poison?" I asked. "No, monsieur." "Can you describe to me its effects?" "It lowers the blood pressure. It is given for some forms of heart trouble. Angina pectoris, for instance. It relieves the arterial tension. In arteriosclerosis," I interrupted him. "Ma foi! This rigmarole says nothing to me. Does it cause the face to flush?" "Certainly it does." "And supposing I ate 10, 20 of your little tablets, what then?" "I should not advise you to attempt it," he replied dryly. "And yet you say it is not poison?" "There are many things not called poison which can kill a man," he replied as before. I left the shop elated. At last things had begun to march. I now knew that John Wilson had the means for the crime, but what about the motive? He had come to Belgium on business, and had asked Monsieur Déroulard, whom he knew slightly, to put him up. There was apparently no way in which Déroulard's death could benefit him. Moreover, I discovered my inquiries in England that had been suffered for some years from that painful form of heart disease known as angina. Therefore, he had a genuine right to have those tablets in his possession. Nevertheless, I was convinced that someone had gone to the chocolate box, opening the full one first by mistake, and had abstracted the contents of the last chocolate, cramming in instead as many little trinitine tablets as it would hold. The chocolates were large ones. Between 20 or 30 tablets, I felt sure, could have been inserted. But who had done this? There were 2 guests in the house. John Wilson had the means. Saint-Alard had the motive. Remember, he was a fanatic, and there is no fanatic like a religious fanatic. Could he, by any means, have got hold of John Wilson's trinitine? Another little idea came to me. Ah, you smile at my little ideas. Why had Wilson run out of trinitine? Surely he would bring an adequate supply for England. I called once more at the house in the Avenue Louis. Wilson was out, but I saw the girl who did his room, Felice. I demanded of her immediately whether or not it was true that Mr. Wilson had lost a bottle from his washstand some little time ago. Lost a bottle. The girl responded eagerly. It was quite true. She, Felice, had been blamed for it. The English gentleman had evidently thought she had broken it, and did not like to say so, whereas she had never even touched it. Without doubt it was Jeanette, always nosing around where she had no business to be. Just taking a sip. I calmed the flow of words and took my leave. I knew now all that I wanted to know. It remained for me to prove my case. That, I felt, would not be easy. I might be sure that Saint-Alard had removed the bottle of trinitine from John Wilson's washstand, but to convince others, I would have to produce evidence, and I had none to produce. Never mind, I knew that was the great thing. You remember our difficulty in the Styles case, Hastings? There again, I knew. But it took me a long time to find the last link which made my chain of evidence against the murder complete. I asked for an interview with Mademoiselle Ménard. She came at once. I demanded of her the address of Monsieur de Saint-Alard. A look of trouble came over her face. Why do you want it, monsieur? Mademoiselle, it is necessary. She seemed doubtful, troubled. He can tell you nothing. He is a man whose thoughts are not in this world. He hardly notices what goes on around him. Possibly, mademoiselle. Nevertheless, he is an old friend of Monsieur de Roulard's. There may be things he can tell me. Things of the past, old grudges, old love affairs. The girl flushed and bit her lip. As you please, but I feel sure now that I have been mistaken. It is good of you to accede to my demand. But I was upset, almost distraught at the time. I see now that there is no mystery to solve. Leave it, I beg of you, monsieur. I eyed her closely. Mademoiselle, I said, it is sometimes difficult for a dog to find a scent, but once he has found it, nothing on earth will make him leave it. This is if he is a good dog. And I, mademoiselle, Poirot, am a very good dog. Without a word, she turned away. A few minutes later, she returned with the address written on a sheet of paper. I left the house. Françoise was waiting for me outside. He looked at me anxiously. There is no news, monsieur? None as yet, my friend. Oh, pauvre Monsieur de Roulard, he sighed. I, too, was of his way of thinking. I do not care for priests. Not that I would say so in the house. The women are all devout, good thing perhaps. Madame est très pieuse, et Mademoiselle Virginie aussi. Mademoiselle Virginie? Was she très pious? I'm assuming that means pious. Thinking of the tear-stained, passionate face that I had seen that first day, I wondered. Having obtained the address of Monsieur de Saint-Alard, I wasted no time. I arrived in the neighborhood of his chateau in the Ardennes, but it was some days before I could find a pretext for gaining admission to the house. In the end, I did, how do you think, as a plumber, mon ami. It was the affair of a moment to arrange a neat little gas leak in his bedroom. I departed for my tools, and took care to return them with them at an hour when I knew I should have the field pretty well to myself. What I was searching for I hardly knew. The one thing needful I could not believe there was any chance of finding. He would never have run the risk of keeping it. Still, when I found the little cupboard above the washstand locked, I could not resist the temptation of seeing what was inside it. The lock was quite a simple one to pick. The door swung open. It was full of bottles. I took them up one by one with a trembling hand. Suddenly I uttered a cry. Figure to yourself, my friend. I held in my hand a little phial with an English chemist's label. On it were the words, "Trinitine tablets, one to be taken when acquired. Mr. John Wilson." I controlled my emotions, closed the cupboard, slipped the bottle into my pocket, and continued to repair the gas leak. One must be methodical. And I left the chateau and took train for my own country as soon as possible. I arrived in Brussels late that night. I was writing out a report for the préfet in the morning when a note was brought to me. It was from old Madame de Roulard, and it summoned me to the house in the Avenue Louis without delay. Francois opened the door to me. "Madame la Baronne is awaiting you." He conducted me to her apartments. She sat in state in a large armchair. There was no sign of Mademoiselle Virginie. "Monsieur Poirot," said the old lady, "I have just learned that you are not what you pretend to be. You are a police officer." "That is so, madame." "You came here to inquire into the circumstances of my son's death." Again I replied, "That is so, madame." I should be glad if you would tell me what progress you have made." I hesitated. "First, I would like to know how you have learned all this, madame." "From one who is no longer of this world." Her words and the brooding way she uttered them sent a chill to my heart. I was incapable of speech. "Therefore, monsieur, I would beg of you most urgently to tell me exactly what progress you have made in your investigation." "Madame, my investigation is finished. My son was killed deliberately." "You know by whom?" "Yes, madame." "Who, then?" "Monsieur de Saint-Alard." "You are wrong. Monsieur de Saint-Alard is incapable of such a crime." "The proofs are in my hand." "I beg of you once more to tell me all." This time I obeyed, going over each step that had led me to the discovery of the truth. She listened attentively. At the end she nodded her head. "Yes, yes, it is all as you say, but all but one thing. It was not Monsieur de Saint-Alard who killed my son. It was I, his mother." I stared at her. She continued to nod her head gently. "It is well that I sent for you. It is the providence of the good God that Virginie told me before she departed for the convent what she had done. Listen, Monsieur Poirot. My son was an evil man. He persecuted the church. He had led a life of mortal sin. He dragged down the other souls beside his own. But there was worse than that. As I came out of my room in this house one morning, I saw my daughter-in-law standing at the head of the stairs. She was reading a letter. I saw my son steal up behind her. One swift push, and she fell, striking her head on the marble steps. When they picked her up, she was dead. My son was a murderer, and only I, his mother, knew it." She closed her eyes for a moment. "You cannot conceive, monsieur, of my agony, my despair. What was I to do? Denounce him to the police? I could not bring myself to do it. It was my duty, but my flesh was weak. Besides, would they believe me? My eyesight had been failing for some time. They would say I was mistaken. I kept silence, but my conscience gave me no peace. By keeping silence, I too was a murderer. My son inherited his wife's money. He flourished as the green bay tree. And now he has to have a minister's portfolio. His persecution of the church would be redoubled. And there was Virginie. She, poor child, beautiful, naturally pious, was fascinated by him. He had a strange and terrible power over women. I saw it coming. I was powerless to prevent it. He had no intention of marrying her. The time came when she was ready to yield everything to him. Then I saw my path clear. He had killed one woman's body. Now he would kill another's soul. I went to Mr. Wilson's room and took the bottle of tablets. He had once said He had once said laughingly that there were enough in it to kill a man. I went into the study and opened the big box of chocolates that always stood on the table. I opened a new box by mistake. The other was on the table also. There was just one chocolate left in it. That simplified things. No one ate chocolates except my son and Virginie. I would keep her with me that night. All went as I had planned. She paused, closing her eyes a minute, then opened them again. Monsieur Poirot, I am in your hands. They tell me I have not many days to live. I am willing to answer for my action before the good God. Must I answer for it on earth also? I hesitated. But the empty bottle, madame, I said to gain time. How came that into Monsieur de Saint-Alard's possession? When he came to say good-bye to me, monsieur, I slipped it into his pocket. I did not know how to get rid of it. I am so infirm that I cannot move about much without help, and finding it empty in my rooms might have caused suspicion. You understand, monsieur? She drew herself up to her full height. It was with no idea of casting suspicion on Monsieur de Saint-Alard. I never dreamed of such a thing. I thought his valet would find an empty bottle and throw it away without question. I bowed my head. I comprehend, madame, I said. And your decision, monsieur? Her voice was firm and unfaltering, her head held as high as ever. I rose to my feet. Madame, I said, I have the honor to wish you good day. I have made my investigations. And failed. The matter is closed. He was silent for a moment, then said very quickly, She died just a week later. Madame Virginie passed through her novitiate, and duly took the veil. That, my friend, is the story. I must admit that I do not make a fine figure in it. That was hardly a failure, I expostulated. What else could you have done under the circumstances? Ah, sacré, mon ami, cried Poirot, becoming suddenly animated. Is it that you do not see? But I was 36 times an idiot. My grey cells, they functioned not at all. The whole time I had the clue in my hands. What clue? The chocolate box. Do you not see? Would anyone in possession of their full eyesight make such a mistake? I knew Madame Deroulard had cataracts. The atropine drops told me that. There was only one person in the household whose eyesight was such that she could not see which lid to replace. It was the chocolate box that started me on the track, and yet up to the end I failed consistently to perceive its real significance. Also my psychology was at fault. Had Monsieur de Saint-Alard been the criminal, he would never have kept an incriminating bottle. Finding it was a proof of his innocence. I had learned already from Mademoiselle Virginie that he was absent-minded. Altogether it was a miserable affair that I have recounted to you there. Only you have I told the story. You comprehend, I do not figure well in it. An old lady commits a crime in such a simple and clever fashion that I, Poirot, am completely deceived. Sapristi, It does not bear thinking of. Forget it. Or no, remember it, and if you think at any time that I am growing conceited, it is not likely, but it might arise. I concealed a smile. Eh bien, my friend, you shall say to me, chocolate box. Is it agreed? It's a bargain. After all, said Poirot reflectively, it was an experience. I who have undoubtedly the finest brain in Europe at present, can afford to be magnanimous. Chocolate box, I murmured gently. Pardon, mon ami? I looked at Poirot's innocent face as he bent forward inquiringly, and my heart smote me. I had suffered often at his hands, but I, too, though not possessing the finest brain in Europe, could afford to be magnanimous. Nothing, I lied, and lit another pipe, smiling to myself. All right, looks like we're exactly on time. It's not even 4. And we have completed Poirot Investigates. Not bad for 2 hours work reading 4 stories. They were kind of shorter this time. All right, so I think that I'm going to take a little bit of a break, and then I'm going to come back with a game stream. And I'm not quite sure what I'm going to play yet. I might do some Terraria. Oh, thank you so much for the donation, Miss Bright. Yes, for the new mic. I am looking forward to getting a new mic and getting some good quality audio for the story times. I really appreciate it. But yeah, I'm going to take a little bit of a break. Okay. Thank you. So that it wouldn't do the little chimey over the reading. Yes, new mics are good. All right. What do you guys think I should play? I have Terraria. I could try to do like a stream, like a not a co-stream, but some. I'm going to be getting the Yeti Nano, the blue one. I have my eye on, and they're about 130-ish, something like that. I've looked at the reviews, and they've all been pretty good reviews. The larger Yeti, some people are like, yeah, it worked for like a month, and then it stopped working. So hopefully the Nano's the way to go. Anyways, what do any of you have any requests for a game stream? Ooh, nice. Yeah, I've just heard really good things about the Yeti. So let's see, for game stream we can do, I don't know if I'd be able to do, well, I can try it with, actually with my new updated speed. I could try to do a Genshin Impact stream. I could do some Terraria. We've got the beautiful stained glass window puzzles game Glass Masquerade. And let's see, I finished up, oh, I could possibly play the demo of Darkside Detective 2. I haven't downloaded that yet. What else do I have? Really quickly going to bring that up. Let's see, we have, I could play some The Room. Oh, what is this? Hang on a second. Interesting. Okay, yes, sorry about that. There's Littlewood. There's Starbound. I could try to play some Starbound. And there's A Short Hike. There's so many to choose from. Yeah, anyways, say in chat if you have any suggestions for a game stream. I'm going to end this stream and take a little bit of a break. And then when I come back, I'll see the chat and decide what we're going to play. I hope to see you in a few. If not, I hope you have a nice rest of your time zone. Bye.